Alright, in the previous video we have learned how to create an array, and we have learned what happens in the memory when we create an array. Now in this video, let's look at how can we insert a new element to the array. Okay, let's say we have an array of size of 6, and here first 3 cells are occupied and other 3 cells are empty. Now if we want to insert an element to this cell, which is index of 3 over here, in this case we just need to put the array name, which is my array. Then inside square brackets we are putting array index, then we are assigning a value to it. Now after doing so, the value will be inserted to this array over here. Now similarly, if we want to insert an element at the index of 5, we are going to do the same operation over here. We will just put the name of array, then inside square bracket we will put the index of the cell that we want to insert, and we will put the value. Now in this case the value is string, that's why we are putting in quotes, but if it is integer we don't need to put quotes over here. So after doing so, the value will be inserted to this array over here. Now let's look at another condition. Now let's say we have an array of size of 6, and here we have one cell empty over here, but we want to insert at the beginning of the array. Now how can we do this operation? Now in this case, this is a very time consuming operation because we have to move all elements one step right. So then after moving all elements one step right, then the first cell will be empty, then we can insert this element to the first cell. Now after doing so, our array will look like this. But here you need to take into account that to move all these elements one step right is very time consuming operation. So now usually it's not recommended to add at the beginning of array, because if you have million cells in the array, then in this case it will be very time consuming. Now let's look at another condition. So you might be interested what happens if the array is full. Now in this case, if the array is full, regularly we are returning saying that this array is full, we cannot insert an element. But if you are insisting to insert an element when the array is full, there is another alternative option. Now in this case we are creating a new array with more size, maybe the double size of the current array. Then we are moving all elements of this element to this array. Then we can insert extra elements to these empty spaces over here. Now here again, this is also very time consuming operation, and if you have million cells, it will be very time consuming. And this is not recommended if it is not urgent. Now here we have understood the logic of inserting a new value to the array. Now let's see how this is working in Java. So let's implement insertion in practice. Now here I have created a new Java file which is single dimension array. Then here inside this file I'm going to create class, single dimension class. Then inside this class I will implement all functions that are related to single dimension array. So in this lecture we will implement only insert function, but in upcoming lectures we will implement other functions. So here I will declare our class like this. So the class name will be single dimension array. Now here I'm going to create an array for integers. So it's up to you which data type you are selecting, but for simplicity I'm going to use integer. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I will initialize our array like this, arr equals to null. Then here I'm going to create constructor. So what basically this constructor does is it's just initializing the all elements of the array with the value of minimum integer value in Java. Because when we are creating an array of integer, it sets all cells value to 0, but I don't want them to be 0. That's why I'm going to create a constructor over here which sets them to the minimum integer value in Java. So in this case I'm going to create a method over here like this, public single dimension array. Now it will take as a parameter integer, size of array. So we need to set the size of array over here. Now inside this function I'm going to set all elements to the minimum integer. So before doing set, we need to set our arr to integer with the size of array. So here we have declared our array. Here we are instantiating it, which means that it allocates the cells in the memory. Then in the third step, as we discussed in our previous lecture, we are going to initialize the value. So in this case, I'm going to initialize value with the minimum integer value in Java. To do so, I need to loop through the array. So this part will be explained in our next lecture when we are explaining the array traversal. So here I'm just going to quickly put our loop without going to do details. So basically what we are doing over here, our I starts from 0 until we reach the array length, and then I will set the arr values with the index of I to the integer dot min value. In this case, all elements of the arrays are set to minimum value. So this is just our constructor method. So we need this one when we are creating an array with the different values which are different than the default value. Now here, after this method, I'm going to create our insert method. So our insert method will be like this: public void. It's not going to return any value, that's why I'm putting void over here. So the name of function will be insert. So it will take two parameters. The first parameter will be the location, which will be the index of the cell that we want to insert, and the second parameter will be the value that we want to insert. So as our value is integer, so I'm putting the value to be inserted as a type of integer. Now here, the first thing that I'm going to do, if the cell value in the mentioned location is equals to the integer minimum value, it means that this cell is empty, so we are going to insert to this value over here. So I will write our if condition like this: if ARR with the index of location in which we want to insert our value, so this is coming from the parameter, equals to integer dot minimum value, so this is the value that we have set in our constructor method. Then in this case, I will set this value, ARR location, which is the cell that we want to insert, to the value to be inserted. Now after doing so, I'm going to print to the console that this value successfully inserted. So I will call system out print method. So here I'm going to print to the console that successfully inserted. Now in the else condition, if ARR location is not equal to integer minimum value, it means that it's already occupied. So we need to print to the console that this cell is already occupied by another value. So in else condition, I'm going to write something like this. So I'll just copy this part of code from here and put it over here. And in the message, we are going to say that this cell is already occupied. So this means that the value is not inserted to this array over here. Now you might be interested if the size of array is, for example, 7, and we want to insert at the location of 8 or 7 itself, because if the array size is the 7, the maximum index is 6. So if you want to insert at the location of 7, what will happen? Now in this case, our method should return saying that this is invalid index. Now we can do it by writing another if condition over here by checking if the index value is greater than the size of array, we can print out message. Now the more professional way of doing this is exception. In Java, we have index output bounds exception, which is for these cases. So if you put the index that is illegal for this array, then in this case, this exception raises. Now to write an exception in Java, we are going to use try and catch block. So here in the beginning, I will put try catch block like this. So in this case, it's going to be catch. So let me just put like this. So I'm going to copy all our code from here inside try block. Then inside catch block, I'm going to put our exception like this: array index out of bound exception. As you see, it comes over here, so it's going to be as E. Now when we have this exception over here, we are going to print out saying that invalid index to access an array. So here I'm going to print out saying that invalid index to access array. Now with this, we have finished our method. So here we have implemented 3 conditions. So in the first condition, we are checking that if the value of the cell is empty, then we are inserting to this value. So if this is full, so we are returning saying that this cell is already occupied. Now the third condition is if we are putting an invalid index, then it returns saying that the index is invalid. Now let's check how this is working in Java. Now inside main Java file, I'm going to initialize our array. Our single dimensional array will be like this by calling the single dimensional class with the size of 10. Then we are inserting elements over here. Now in the first case, we are inserting an element at the 0 index, then we are inserting an element at the index of 1, then we are inserting an element at the index of 2, then we are inserting an element at the index of 1 more time to see what will happen. Then we are putting an index which is greater than the size of array. Now we will check all these cases over here. Now let's run our code to see how this is working. Now you see that for the first case, it's inserted successfully, and for the second case also it's inserted successfully, and for the third case also it's inserted successfully. But when it comes to the fourth case, you see that we are trying to insert a new element at the index of 1. Now in this case, at the index of 1 is already occupied, so that's why this says that the cell is already occupied. Now then, at the fifth case, we are trying to insert an element at the index which does not exist. So in this case, it says that invalid index to access array. This means that the exception that we have created over here, array index out of bounds exception, is executed in this case. Now with this we have completed the implementation of insert method. Now let's see what's the time complexity for this method over here. Now as always, when we are calculating the time complexity of a method, in this case we will start from the first line of code. Now in the first line of code we have if condition over here. Now this if condition accesses the element of array and checking it with integer minimum value. So this part of code will take O1 time complexity. Then because we know that accessing an element of array takes O1 time complexity. Now in the second part we are assigning a value to the element of array. Now in this case this part also will take O1 time complexity. Now here also takes O1 time complexity, in which we are printing out message to the console. Now same rule is applicable for this one, which is printing the message to the console. Now if we continue to do this catch block, so the catch block also will take O1 time complexity, because in this case we are just returning a message to the console. Now if you combine all these complexities over here, we are getting O1 time complexity. Now you need to take into account that in this case we have not implemented two cases. The first case is inserting an element at the beginning of array, because in this case the time complexity will be different. And the second case is if the array is full. Now in this case we need to create a new array and insert all elements to that array. So this operation also is time consuming, so I have not implemented over here. So that's why for this case of insertion, our method will take O1 time complexity. Now with this we have come to the end of this lecture, so hopefully everything is clear about insertion an element to the array. So see you in the next lecture.